Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Richard White. I am the chief curator at the Tennessee State Museum. So we partnered with Dr. Doctor on this symposium today, conference. Very happy to be here. But we have some major projects in the works at the Tennessee State Museum. Some of those have just reached the 50% design. So we're now allowed to start sharing them with people. But two of my curators are here today, Lawrence Dahl and Spada. I've been very fortunate, brought both of these two scholars on just within the last year. We had some retirements at the museum, so opened up some positions. So we have some great young scholars here to tell you guys a little bit about some of those projects, but not to steal too much of their thunder. We are building and designing a new military veterans museum in downtown Nashville that will supplant the old War Memorial Museum. And we're also building a Capitol Visitor Center. So both of those will be located in the War Memorial Plaza, which is the plaza that's right in front of that War Memorial building. But we're working on the content, designing, crafting those stories that we'll tell about our Tennessee veterans. So they're going to share a little bit about that today, how we've selected some of those stories, and they're also going to share with you some really interesting collections that we have just brought in within the last 6 to 8 months within the museum collection. So I'm going to turn it over to Larry and Tara and let them roll here. But thank you all for letting us be here today.
Thank you for having us again. My name is Spada. We're happy to be here.
And I'm Lawrence Dahl, and we are very happy to be here and give you this talk today about the new Veterans Museum.
Could we get a little bit more sound?
Sure. We can step forward then for you. Is that better?
I think you're going to
All right, let's move a little closer here. So here we have a general overview of what the museum is going to look like. Right now we're only at the 50% design phase, so some of these things may change over the time period. We're looking at 4 distinct areas within it. So you'll come in, you'll hit the initial video place, then you'll move into a look inside, then you move into training, conflicts, and then returning home. And we'll get to those slides later, going more in depth in those different areas. And we're trying to direct the people through this story of you come in, you learn a bit about the history of Tennessee military before where we're starting off. We're starting off in the Spanish-American War. So you're going to learn a bit about the volunteer state before then, and then we'll jump into Spanish-American War after that. And then you'll move into the look inside, see what the people's homes look like, what they were doing before they joined up in the service. Then you'll move into their training, various bases that are within the state of Tennessee, move into the conflicts that they served into, and then eventual returning home in either as a veteran or as someone that has passed away and they're being reinterred in the state.
So here we just have a visual of our strategy. We are working with Gallagher Associates exhibit design firm, and they kind of are helping us with the more creative and graphic design architectural aspects, and we are more responsible for the collection, obviously, and the content and the history and the stories that we want to tell. And they came up with the there, and there. So the there is obviously the individual Tennessean story. We're going to go there, either from home to abroad, overseas, and they are, as when we return home and what they are doing or were doing.
So when you step into the museum, you're going to be introduced to that intro video, which we're going to utilize many photographs and various artifacts from our collection to tell the story of the early Tennessee volunteers, people, the Over Mountain Men, the Civil War, Revolutionary War time period, and just leading up into the Spanish-American War to try to introduce you to the idea of what the volunteer state is and the Tennesseans that did serve within the state. And then we'll jump into the Spanish-American War.
So one of the interesting things we're doing in the museum is showcasing what veterans were doing prior to their service, and this is where the view from the inside comes in. There's going to be a thematic room. It's going to be period pieces to show sort of where the person was situated in time. They're going to build a mock-out of the room and have artifacts that either from collections that were directly associated with the veteran or the person, or something closely representative.
So although we break out into different generational scenes, there are threads of similarities between each call to service. We'll illustrate in the world events and the various ways Americans receive the news of them. So for World War II, for example, we'll showcase, the attack on Pearl Harbor and how people are viewing that and influencing their decisions to go and serve, if it was by volunteer or by draft. like Tara said, we're going to have small built-in cases for personal items that related to these veterans. And this will just be your jumping off point to get introduced to a few of the veterans that you'll then see later on in the conflicts, and then you'll see them in the coming home. So it's those through lines that we're trying to introduce, so you get connected to these people and you learn a little bit more about specific people within our collection that we have like really in-depth collections of.
And one of those people, I'm sure you all know, is Alvin York. We have a pretty robust collection of his from his time before he became a soldier. We will talk a little bit about who he was beforehand and how he was a conscientious objector, how he went into war sort of unwillingly, his roots in his homeland, and how he was just, a good old boy who took care of his family, was a hunter. And he is a collection that we have items throughout. So we'll have a very complete story of his throughout, before what he was doing, sort of how he was thrust into war, what he did when he came home, and how he was a great example of a citizen soldier.
Then we move into World War II. So you have Floyd Sharp as one of our big characters for World War II that we see multiple times throughout his story. He was born in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1926. He attended rural high school. He was a star athlete in football and basketball. And his basketball career spanned 2 years, and his football career spanned a couple more years. He was an all-star player for football. So we're going to look at having artifacts related to his football career to highlight what he was doing before his service. So we'll have his football helmet, we'll have a photograph of him. And this just highlights what he was doing right before his draft, because he was drafted between his junior and senior year of high school. So he was unfortunately not able to finish high school at the time because he was drafted, but this is a way to showcase what he was doing right before leaving.
And then we have something for each conflict. So this Korean War room we have is William Lyle's artifact. He has a great collection with us. He also was a gifted football player. He had, athletic trophies, captain of the football team. He was working at the DuPont chemical plant, and then he was also drafted. So we're kind of illustrating what he was doing, sort of his prospects, and then also how he found himself in service, and in this case, he was drafted.
And then we move on to Vietnam. Will be our next room that we're looking at, and that's going to be Ronald Virgil Putnam, another high school athlete. He was all Duck River Valley Conference honors his senior year. He was a member of the Beta Club, Future Teachers of America, Future Farmers of America. So he's a really active student when he was in high school. And then after his graduation, he enrolled in MTSU for a short bit before leaving MTSU and joining the Army Reserve, joining the reserves in the military, and then he was sent overseas as a result of that. So we're looking at his career before his military service, so mostly high school and stuff like that. But then we're going to talk a little bit more later about his military service.
So next we have the heading out section, and this is an exciting area that we can get really specific and local and kind of micro in aspect of just Tennessee and World War II, and getting prepared to going overseas, because Tennessee has a great deal of history here. So we're going to talk about the maneuvers, and we'll be able to talk about the bases, explaining the process of going to boot camp and joining up and preparing and using local stories for that. And here we have a mock-up of sort of what we're going to talk about with the boot camps and training. They really wanted to emphasize an atmosphere and aesthetic themes. So this is still 50%. We're still going to work with them. What would it feel like to be in a barracks? What would, a training camp look like? And we're going to explain how the soldiers were prepared.
So we're going to talk a little bit about like the major bases that were within the state. So you have Army training bases such as Camp Campbell, Camp Forrest, and Camp Tyson. You have the air bases such as Naval Air Station Memphis, Smyrna Airfield, Dyersburg Army Air Base. So these bases played a major role in the buildup and the training of Tennesseans and also soldiers from outside of the state of Tennessee that were brought here for their future training and everything. So we'll have artifacts such as the pillowcases, which were very common throughout the war for service members to send home to family members to showcase where they were and as a souvenir of what they were doing during their time there.
And this is just a good illustration that we're trying to get artifacts, items, and stories from all over the state because there were military endeavors all over. Obviously, we just heard about Oak Ridge. There's a lot in Lebanon with the maneuvers. There's a naval base over in Memphis. So we're trying to get all aspects of the state represented, and that will be an ongoing process where we can get sort of stories from all areas of the state represented.
And we have some really interesting bases here within the state of Tennessee that were very unique. So such as Camp Tyson is one of the ones we're going to look to highlight because it was a barrage balloon training base, which was very unique to Tennessee. There weren't many others in the country, so it was something that's very specialized here. It's a specialized training program that soldiers would undergo. And then these barrage balloons played a critical role in Europe during the war with protecting naval fleets that were during the D-Day landings. They played a major role. If you see the little balloons flying high with cables leading up to the ships, a lot of those men were trained here, the ones that were using those and things like that. So we're looking to highlight that with various souvenirs such as the little pennant here, which is similar to the souvenir pillowcase that just showcases like, hey, I was there, this is what I was doing, this is what the camp did. These bases were often also used as prisoner of war camps, so it's another way to showcase how Tennesseans and the bases that were built here were used for various roles throughout the conflicts.
So a great one is Camp Forest, a training camp for the Army. Patton visited there. This is another large prisoner of war camp, and we have a good amount of artifacts that we will display for this one.
And speaking about Patton, he had a major role in the Tennessee maneuvers, and the maneuvers were a critical role, played a critical role in training troops for their jumping off point and getting them ready to serve overseas. These exercises took part between 1941 and 1944 and included a lot of Middle Tennessee counties, such as Williamson, Wilson, Rutherford, Sumner, Bedford, Cannon, Coffee. So a lot of these counties within Middle Tennessee played a major role in housing those troops and allowing them to take part in these various maneuvers, large-scale maneuvers. They were brought here because of the rolling terrain in Middle Tennessee very much mirrored the terrain of Western Europe with France and Germany to prepare soldiers for how to properly do these large-scale military maneuvers utilizing armored infantry and aircraft in joint operations. Speaking on General Patton, he took part in the first maneuver. He defeated the opposing forces utilizing armor tactics supposedly based on the Nathan Bedford Forrest cavalry doctrine, which is an interesting fact. It ties you back into the Civil War time period of Tennessee and everything. This perfected strategy of utilizing armored units here ultimately helped prepare him for fighting in Europe. And because of these successes, the maneuvers were expanded upon in manpower and area. Between 1942 and 1944, over 800,000 men and women participated in some aspect here in Middle Tennessee during these maneuvers. Soldiers were divided into two armies, the Blue Army and the Red Army. Each was assigned a problem or a task that they were trying to accomplish, and this could be ranged from taking a town, defending a river, or attacking a certain strong points like farms and things like that. These operations were then watched by observers who would then give you scenarios where someone was killed or injured or if a bridge was taken out already so you couldn't go that way, so you could adapt and work through your various problems. So here we have a clip if it wants to play. Let's see if I can play this here. Yeah, I gotta figure out where the mouse is on the screen.
No, there it is.
So this isn't in Tennessee, but it does showcase what these problems would be.
Betty! We're in the wrong position. We're in the wrong position.
We're textbook position for ambush, sir. I think we should sit tight and let the enemy team come in our killing zone.
They're right out there somewhere. Let's just get them.
Sir, we have perfect cover here.
Sit tight. Deploy your troops.
Second platoon, move out.
Captain, you've just been killed, along with 95% of your company. Your outfit?
Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506.
Leave 3 wounded men on the ground and report back to the assembly area.
So as you can see, this is kind of what some of these problems would look like. It's very much an active training scenario to prepare the men for making better decisions overseas. There we go.
All right, so once we get past the training and preparation part of the exhibit, we go into conflicts, which will be the more history-heavy kind of traditional military museum displays you would expect, but all catered towards, you know, what happened here in Tennessee and the Tennesseans who served. Like we said, we're going to have graphics that kind of give the atmosphere and the ambiance of the, you know, operation, the theater of operation, and we're starting in with Spanish-American War. And then we're going to have a highlighted individual who served, and hopefully enough casework to fit more artifacts. So here we have Lewis G. Carney. This is a great example of African-American representation. There wasn't a lot back then, so we're very lucky to have his uniform and be able to tell his story. A little bit about Carney. He was born in 1870 in Murfreesboro, and he enlisted in the Army. And the 24th Infantry was one of the original Buffalo Soldier regiments of the Army. Created for various roles in the western United States, his unit participated in several battles in Cuba, such as the Battle of El Caney and the Battle of San Juan Hill. He was also sent to the Philippines, and he suppressed guerrilla fighting there. And when he was discharged, he came back to Nashville, and he worked as a porter at the state capitol. So we have a really great full circle history with this uniform, and that will be one aspect we have in Spanish-American War. You can go. You can take this one.
And then we move into World War I. So we're going to utilize a lot of the themes that you see in many World War I exhibits. So the trenches, the mud, the wood for the trench, for the supports in the trenches. We're going to try to use that as the graphic set for that. And then we're also going to look at including a map down in the center that's also going to showcase where the soldiers were. So you can get a little bit more of an idea of where this specific person went, what they were doing, and things like that. So you have a better idea in the grand scheme of things what they were doing. So you can kind of tie into the broader idea of what was going on during World War I.
So again, we mentioned we're going to highlight Alvin York, and we have rifle for him, and we have his Medal of Honor, and talk a little bit about his valiant acts during the conflict here.
And then we're going to move into World War II. And right now with the design firm, since we are only in 50%, a lot of them aren't historians, not military historians, so they don't know a whole lot of that. They more the graphic side of things. So right now they have just the bombed out city kind of look. And we're going to talk to them about maybe splitting that section into, you know, the Pacific side and more of a bombed out city, so you get both aspects of the war, because we have great collections that are tied to each area. So, for example, this is one of the great collections we just brought in, belonging to Horace Abraham Lever, who's from Tennessee. He flew with the 96th Bomb Group over in Europe on 33 missions aboard the Reich Express, which is displaying here. All of his planes were called something different, but his crew named them all the Reich Express. So this is a great example of a traditional bomber jacket from the time. Has a great graphic. We have a great story of what he was doing before the war, during the war, and then after the war. So it's a great look to see like this camaraderie. It's a very personal story too, and that's what we're trying to draw into, is those personal stories to have you connect to the individual, so that way you can, instead of just learning about, oh, what happened in World War II, you have a personal connection you're trying to derive from it.
We'll also be able to highlight the Cadet Nursing Corps in this section and get a little female representation in there. So we have Ruth Goodson Lane's Cadet Nursing Corps whole uniform, and then we'll have some interesting recruiting posters and discuss a little bit of home front, how the citizenry kind of participated and helped with the war effort. And we just have a cute little video of the Cadet Nurse Corps. This is not in Nashville, but it's a good illustration.
student nurses, members of the newly formed United States Cadet Nurse Corps, marched to New York City Hall for induction. White-capped Navy auxiliaries applaud the young Sisters of Mercy who pledged their lives to serve humanity. Learning without pay, 95,000 volunteers like these are in training throughout the United States.
So that showcased New York City. The one that happened in Nashville actually happened in the War Memorial Building, which is where we're making this new museum. So it's kind of a nice tie into that and everything. And Ruth Goodson Lane participated in that. We have several photographs of that ceremony too. We're looking to include in the graphic side of that portion of the exhibit.
Then we'll go into Floyd Sharp and talk about how he was drafted, some stories of triumph. He also made the ultimate sacrifice and he was killed. So we'll be able to talk about the heavier side of folks who did not return home on their own 2 feet but in a casket. So just a bit about him. He was in the 382nd Infantry Regiment in the 96th Infantry Division. He participated in the Battle of Leyte in Okinawa. And he actually fought in the Battle of Okinawa, was wounded, and did not evacuate. He went back and he fought a couple days later, and that is when he was killed by enemy machine gun fire. And then after the war, his body was reinterred to Knoxville.
So we're going to move on into Korea, and this is an area that we're also going to work with the design company to change the appearance of this graphic, because a lot of times when we're reading letters and stuff like that from the Korean War, a lot of the soldiers are saying it was cold. You know, the cold is what really personified the Korean War to a lot of these veterans. That's something that stuck with them. So we're going to look at shifting the graphic here to a more mountainous, snowy region, so you can kind of draw back into that, how people felt during that time.
And then this is our highlight person from the Korean War. This is William Lyle again, and he was also killed, and we have his Medal of Honor. And he was killed during the Battle of Bloody Ridge. That's not
We'll probably include some sort of write-up about what he did to earn his Medal of Honor, but that's a lot to read right now, and you guys have been here for a while.
I know, so we're the last one of the day. I'm like,
we're going to move past reading through that paragraph.
Yeah, get through there.
But then we go into
Obviously,
the Vietnam War, and that's a lot of that is the jungle aspect of it. So you have the tall grass and everything. So that's going to be more of that, and we're also going to have the map again to try to place the veteran where they're at within the conflict. And Ronald Putnam, who we were introduced to earlier, comes back at this point. And he was competed a couple of acts of courage during the war, earned a Bronze Star and a Silver Star, but unfortunately he was also killed in action. So this is another place where we can put a face to a story and to an artifact that we can then, really connect you to that initial introduction to him in the leaving home and the look inside, so you can meet him again and see where he's at this point. And it also just highlights a personal story. And a lot of people have that tie. Veterans come in from the that served in the Vietnam War, and they had a buddy that was killed in combat and something like that. So this is something that they can tie to and be like, hey, I miss my friend kind of thing, and you can really get personal with it. And that's one of the goals we're trying to do.
All right, in the interest of time, I think you know where we're going with this. I think you know the timeline of history. We've got the Gulf War, and we do have, this is a great highlight. We have Rosemary Mariner's flight suit, and she was a groundbreaking female aviator during the Gulf War, so we are going to highlight her and talk about women in service. She actually paved the way to help pass legislation to allow women to be in combat roles, which is a pretty big deal. So we will have her in the Gulf War. This is a great video, but I won't have us play it because in the interest of time. This is just the flight crew that flew an all-female flyover at her funeral, which was the first time that's happened. So.
A special group of...
You can look it up later.
And then we're going to get into the more modern conflicts, and that's something that we're trying to do, is really bring it on home to what's going on today and really bring it as close to the present as we possibly can, because these veterans are still living and they should be honored for what they did overseas and everything. And that's something that a lot of museums haven't been able to do yet because they just can't update their exhibits as fast or anything. So by us being able to build this brand new museum, we're given that opportunity to put them in on the ground floor and just get them right in there right away. So we're going to look at Adam Thomas is one of our veterans from Afghanistan who actually donated his whole rig that he wore throughout his time in service and everything. You can still see all the sweat stains on it, very prominent. But he did 2 tours in Afghanistan and took part in a couple of different major operations and stuff like that over there. And then he returned home, and he's still living in the Nashville area. So it's one of those opportunities that we're going to look to reach out to the donor and stuff like that so we can get more stories from them, get more of their words into the artifacts and things like that, and see what they're doing after the fact.
Then we get into the things they carried, and this is going to be our interactive area of the exhibit where you can understand sort of the gear and the items that people carried with them throughout time. We have these awesome kinetic panels that kind of highlight different jobs and MOSs, different people, parts, logistics, healthcare, all things that is considered service, and just help the visitor understand that, soldier, being in the service isn't always just shooting the gun and fighting. Like, there's many different roles to play, and they're all important.
So we're going to get into this experience overview area, and this is a place where we're going to have a very nice interactive where you can touch a screen, pick a certain artifact that's going to be on display, such as one of these helmets, and you're going to be able to learn a lot more about it. You can mess around with it on the screen, move it around, learn about measurements, how they were designed, and things like that. It gives us an opportunity to go a little bit more in depth on more general equipment. And we're going to look at very much change over time is one of the aspects we're trying to look at here. So you move from Spanish-American War, you have the trapdoor Springfield, and then you move up into more modern conflicts. So you have like a VAR, more automatic firepower. We're looking to actively work with other organizations to try to bring in more modern firearms too, but that's still an ongoing process that we're still going through right now. And then for headgear is another area that we're going to look at, and you can see the dramatic shift from the kepis from the Spanish-American War through the World War I helmets and into the more modern Kevlar-based helmets and things like that provide more head cover and more protection from head traumas and things like that. So we're really showcasing that over time. But also you can see that a lot of these instances, you have the helmets, you have Old Hickory Division on the World War I helmet, you have Mad Dog on the more modern helmet, because these are people's actual helmets. So you might be able to introduce a little bit more of their story here too. If they don't have a more robust story like some of our other veterans that we have, this gives you a chance to still recognize them in their service. And then we get into more personal items. So you have general equipment such as shaving kits that a lot of veterans can identify with, like, hey, I had one of those I had to shave in service to keep up with grooming standards and everything. And then you get into religious items such as the Heart Shield Bible and things like that. And then more recreational items. So a lot of veterans, a lot of people were smoking during the conflicts and stuff like that. Cigarettes were often a part of the ration kit. So you have lighters that are personalized. And then you have things like journals for keeping records of what you were doing overseas, writing down little notes and stuff here and there. So we have very personalized items such as that too. And then we move into our final section of the museum is going to be the remembrance area, or the coming home section. So you'll have an area for reflection and reverence, and you'll also have an area for like veteran organizations and things like that. So,
and this is another area where we're going to have a meaningful interactive. It's going to be a screen or a kiosk that people will be able to have make a message to a veteran or a memory of someone they knew who served. And they can have some prompts to choose from, and then it can make this sort of graphic message on a large screen. This is another aspect of the coming home where we kind of tie up all of the stories of the folks that we had been talking throughout, and we'll tie up Alvin York. And when he comes home, we talk about how he uses his fame for good, how he establishes a school in his community. He uses his philanthropy to help folks in his community, and he never kind of stops serving. So we have some great artifacts to highlight that at the end. And then we'll also talk about veterans organizations. It's going to be a great opportunity because I believe we're going to have a Veterans Affairs office in the new facility that's being built. So it won't be just a static history, it will be resources that are actively working, remembering those of who's passed on, but also remembering those who are still around and still need connection or assistance or resources. So we have artifacts that highlight that in our collection, but we'll also be able to provide some resources.
So this goes back to that Tennessee Together, that idea of the interactive to leave your words behind for somebody else. So it'll mostly look like you'll have a prompt, for example, in loving memory of my, and then you can fill in the blank with whoever it is, your father, your brother, uncle, grandfather. Your blank will forever inspire us, rest peacefully, or something like that, where it's you can remember somebody that you lost as like a family member, or if it's a buddy that you lost in service with you, you can put a little message there for them. And then this will be shared on the big screen for other people to look at and remember those who have come before. And then we move into another area of remembrance, which is going to bring into the idea that not everyone comes back alive kind of thing. And that's, for example, Ronald Putnam, who passed away, who was killed in action in Vietnam. We're going to have this is his casket flag. We'll have that on exhibit because it's something that a lot of people that have military family members that have passed away have a connection to. They're handed that flag at the funeral, so it's something that can tie that into a more personal story.
And same goes for Floyd Sharp. It just highlights the Gold Star family and also kind of touches on it wasn't just him who suffered loss, it was all of the people back home who were affected by his loss, and we have a very good amount of artifacts illustrating that the families were impacted as well. We have grieving cards, we have these Gold Star family flags. So I think it kind of really brings it all home that they paid the ultimate sacrifice and also the community was affected, and this is a good time for like everybody to pause and remember that and take time to heal, feel the camaraderie together about it. So as you leave the exhibit, we have a rotating gallery. We're going to use it as art, and our first iteration of it will be art through healing. So we have a lot of artifacts that from folks made in service, trench art and such, art while they were in the field that we can display, and also art that they used to process their emotions after the fact for PTSD or just the process of coming home after a conflict.
So here we have a couple of examples of that. So the mess of things on the left here is for a.
I never realized that said funk hole. Sorry.
It's from a very large World War I diorama that was made by a World War I veteran that used it as a way to cope with his trauma that he experienced during the war. And then that diorama traveled around the state on a boxcar for a while as like a way for people to see it and stuff like that. And then it came to the State Museum, and it's been on display at the previous military branch, but it's come off display. So we're probably not going to be able to put the whole thing on display because it is rather large. So we're going to look at taking certain aspects of it so we can showcase his story and try to tie it into art for healing.
So some issues to wrap it up. We're trying to be short here. Some issues we're encountering, good issues, but still is representation. I'm sure if you're familiar with museums, you know that you can only collect what people give you, and sometimes some of those stories of other groups were not told. So we don't have as much women things, minorities. So we are actively working to find those stories and supplement. If we can't find the physical artifact, then we can go to archives and look for images. We can look for oral histories. Some gaps in our artifact collections, like we mentioned, we don't have a lot of modern weapons, which is an interesting kind of concept. You go to a military museum and they have all of the flashy guns and they have tanks, but the reality is we need more modern weapons. So we're actively trying to find those stories without just being representational. And first-hand accounts tied to the artifacts. When you have a collection that's old like ours, sometimes you can lose some of those stories. You know that it's an important artifact, but is the meat of the story there? Not always. So that just requires us to do some research to really dig in and find, well, what are we missing here? And And the space and design of what we want to do has just been an interesting process to work with Gallagher, the exhibit design firm. They're very creative and excited to put lots of pictures, colors, and interactives. And we are obviously purists of like, we need to tell these stories. Our artifacts are our primary focus here, so we have to make sure we kind of fight for the footprint of our cases and make sure we have enough space and not just,
A lot of pretty pictures
images.
on the wall.
So collaborating with the design firm has been interesting as well, just making sure we all remember our notes and make sure all of our guideposts of what we want are the same. And do you have anything to add to that?
I think we're good on that aspect. But then, like she said, we get into that research side of it, finding out the stories that go along with it. A lot of it is just reading through lots and lots of letters at the archives, just sitting there reading through, trying to find quotes and things like that, because the design firm is really into having quotes throughout the museum, that personal touch to it, but often it's hard to tie in a specific quote to an artifact or anything. So we're trying to look for those various quotes. So we're looking at the archives, fold 3 to find more military information about them, veteran data, looking through newspapers.com, just typing in the veteran's name and just seeing what pops up. So a lot of the information I found out about, like Ronald Virgil Putnam, I found out in newspapers. I found out, his football team scores and things like that. So you find out a lot of that deeper information about them that you can include in the artifacts and things. We're also looking for new donations, always seeing what fills gaps in our collections, like the Lever jacket that just recently came in. More recently, we brought in another bomber jacket from the Pacific Theater. So it's a different style jacket, but it allows us to have rotations of artifacts on exhibit, because the leather that was used in the Lever jacket can't be on display at all times because preservation purposes, it needs to come off and be conserved. So this gives us a chance to highlight another story with a similar artifact, but also look at the Pacific bombing campaigns opposed to the European bombing campaigns. So we do like those new donations to allow for rotations and other stories to be told.
So that kind of leads us to now we're working on outreach. We're establishing relationships with individuals, our current donors, the ones who are still living. We want to reach out to those. Leveraging connections with the governor, that's pretty important, and that's sort of above our pay grade, but we're working on it to get all of those committees kind of on board and to understand what we're doing so that they can help us with their own network. And then reaching out to veteran organizations. We have plans to reach out with the VFW and the American Legion, all sorts of nonprofits that we're looking to contact. And yeah, gathering feedback and looking for stories. A lot of times it kind of just happens organically. You just talk to someone and they tell you, oh, I was in the service. And then you go into where they were and what they were doing, and you just mention, that's an amazing story. That's kind of part of Tennessee history. And they'll say, oh, no, I didn't do anything. But, they might be the only person from their town. That's another, feather in our cap, essentially, for the collection to get more representation from different parts of the state, different jobs, etc. So.
And also just being able to come out and do these kind of talks now that we're able to with the 50% design.
Yeah, now we can tell people.
We're telling people about this amazing project that we're working on, so people are like, oh, hey, I served in Korea. I did this, I did that. Maybe they want something like this, maybe they want something like that. So it allows us to reach a wider audience than the three of us that were sitting in our offices in the basement of the Polk building, trying to figure out what things should go on display. This allows us to work with more veterans and things like that, which is what we're trying to build this museum for. Is it's a veterans museum. We want to honor them and we want to showcase their stories. So being able to engage with them is something that's really important to us.
Yeah.
But
thank you for your time. Sorry, it's the last talk of the day.
Yeah,
yes, we have
questions.
time for questions.
I don't like your concept.
Okay.
I spent 8-9 years in the Army. I've visited military museums all over the country. I want to see history. I don't want to see a bunch of graphics. I want to see weapons.
All the cool stuff.
Stories about the war.
Yes.
Go out here and look in the museum. They got real wagons, real weapons, real cabins. I don't want a bunch of ugly pictures.
That's one of the issues that we are running into
trying
with
to
the
tell
design firm, is that we want more casework so we can showcase those artifacts within the collection. Because we have in the
You didn't
museum.
show any artifacts. You just showed a bunch of ugly old modern pictures.
These were just the mock-ups for the museum. They don't have the artifacts included in the image.
Oh yes, that's a good thing to mention. So the graphics you saw were mocked up by the design firm. Me and Larry are actively looking through our collection to figure out what would be good artifacts, but they have not placed the images of our artifacts in those mock-ups. So
Can I help you out here a little bit?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm Max Hastings. I was adjutant general in Tennessee for 10 years and
Ooh.
served 40 years in
Thank
the
you.
service. And you're wanting some equipment and stuff. You need to go talk to your Tennessee Military Department.
We
Talk
do
to
have
Doug and Ross over there. We've got vaults of equipment, modern weapons.
We do have meetings planned with some people with the department and stuff like that.
We started doing this about 16 years ago, and it kind of died a natural death because it cost too much to build this museum, and then they were building Trey Hargett, and the guys was building another museum downtown. So I'm telling you, you need to go talk to the military department. They got tons of equipment over there. The other thing is
We
that
have a meeting set up with Lieutenant Colonel
well,
Salaka.
go talk to Doug and
Next
Ross.
week, I
He's
think.
the tag, and he's the guy. The other thing is that Tennessee, since when I started as a tag in 2000, we've deployed over 40,000 people. I hope you guys got something in that museum about the Tennessee National Guard, because we go all the way back.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
We do.
to the history of this country. Okay. I mean, and I'm talking about the Spanish-American War. You know, World War I, II units from Tennessee. The Tennessee
Oh, yeah.
Maneuvers, the 30th Division that we have between North Carolina and South Carolina, huge, huge deal. The Tennessee Maneuvers, I started it back. Again, they're still having Tennessee Maneuvers. You know, 6 years ago, we started it back
Yep.
and using the same concept.
Yep.
So there's lots of stuff out there. And the guy that works for the state of Tennessee, used to work for the health department, was their public information guy, Woody McMillan. I don't know whether you know Woody or not, but you need to go get a hold of Woody, because he wrote the book In the Presence of Soldiers, and it covers the Tennessee Movers from stem to stern.
Perfect.
So
Yeah.
you got equipment, it's all out there. Like the guy said, he wants to see the real stuff.
And that's what we're trying. That is what we're trying to do.
That's
Go to
good.
my basement, get it.
And that's one of the things we are trying to do is trying to get those things on display and everything. That's just working with the design company
Oh,
and
yeah.
trying to get them to
You're
listen
preaching
to
to
us.
the choir. We want this stuff.
Yes.
Yes.
From museum to museum, I understand the frustration of being able to try to put a concept out there, but it's not, when you're working with people who aren't museum professionals, to fully get your idea displayed in a public forum.
Yes.
So I applaud you. I think the style of it is absolutely fantastic. What I would like to know is, are you working with other historical organizations in your area to recount those early veteran stories as well?
So it's one of those areas where because we're just now able to start telling people, we are now starting to create those, set up those meetings with the various organizations and things like that. A lot of times that goes above us, goes more towards Ashley and Richard, who can set those up, and then we kind of just go with them. But we can work on the more personal level with other veterans that we know or we have worked with before. So people that have gone through and donated objects, we can reach out to them and things like that. But we're looking forward to this next phase of the design where we can reach out to those other organizations. And we've worked with TSLA, Metro Archives, and other things like that to try to get what they have in their collection so we can look at their stories and try to incorporate those into ours.
And we
I
have.
applaud you for the square footage that you're going with as well, because you're doing a lot with very little.
Yes. It feels like a lot right now, but it's going to be much smaller. And I'm sure, as you know, as like a project goes on, things shrink and shrink. So we asked for a lot at the front end, hopefully took up the space that we needed, and we hopefully will keep that space. Yes.
I have sort of two questions. And let me start by saying I think that was an excellent presentation. I really loved seeing the vision for what you're trying to achieve. And when you do have the objects and you do have the collection, I think it's going to be remarkable. So thank you for sharing that. And I have two questions. One's really boring and historic graphic because I'm a historian, but I'll do the fun one first. And this is maybe actually a question for Gallagher, because we've worked with Gallagher before too. And obviously you've taken an approach of the culture of war, not just the history of war. So it's a broader thing. So you start with life before the conflict and then coming home, which I applaud, and that is absolutely where the historiography is going. But my question in doing that and taking a kind of total approach, you've split it up into sort of Vietnam, Korea, and so forth. And I wonder if there's an overarching concept of the Cold War and espionage and that, and if not, that's something I'd mention to Gallagher in any kind of role. You know, earlier today, Ray Smith talked about espionage and the role that played with atomic weapons and that. So that's a pro tip, I guess, more than a question. The question that is boring and historiographical is, in the earlier part, you're clearly using a kind of micro-history approach and an everyday history approach. And I wonder what historiography you're relying on, what authors, and that may be a Gallagher question, I don't know.
In which aspect are you looking? Are you talking about, we're trying to use a lot of personal stories for those artifacts to try to tie into there. And then, are you looking for what?
So I'm asking about the methodology you're using in the opening, in the sort of beforehand stuff.
The video area and stuff like that?
They're wanting mainly personal story experiences from these people. So we take their accounts that then sort of helps you create the national narrative. That's one of the areas where we are running into a little bit and having to do some deep research to find these accounts of how a Tennessean in Grundy County is perceiving what's going on in Europe at the time.
Well, because there may be some because there, in Britain, there's a lot that's been done on history of everyday life that might be very useful in terms of like knowledge exchange. And in those terms as well, with the World War I section, and Alan and Richard will both know that at the Imperial War Museum, and if you've not been, I would absolutely recommend you go. You should tell Ashley she should fly you to see it.
Send her an email.
I will. But I mean, the World War I section of the Imperial War Museum is that sort of immersive trench experience. And to this day, it's quite a harrowing experience, and it's remarkable. And I would recommend anybody who's working on that do that. I mean, when we did the Alan York thing here, we used a very similar thing, and I would recommend anybody see what they're doing there as a kind of touch point for that.
Yeah. Well, and a couple of other guideposts on this is the War Memorial Building in Nashville was Tennessee's World War I memorial. It's the office building. So part of the charter for that building was that there was going to be a veteran museum adjacent or attached to it. So that is part of the time frame that we're doing. At the main museum, you get the American Revolution, the War of 1812, an entire gallery about the Civil War. So our intro film and some of the stuff here, it picks you up at Span Am because at the time the building was commissioned, those were still your living veterans. Now we today don't have any Spanish-American War living veterans, but we're still taking that as sort of the turn into the modern war. And we've, as you all know here, this becomes a little bit difficult and more challenging too, because even if you're a Tennessean, you're a cog in the national machine. And so in our main museum, you get these Tennessee volunteer regiments in the War of 1812. Of course, the Civil War, you've got Tennessee regiments on both sides. You can look at those very state specific. But here, once these guys leave Tennessee, they become part of this big thing. So what is their experience in the Army, and how do they sort of stand out with their, Tennessee roots and where that goes to? So we have had some sort of challenges because it's looking at it in a different way. So that's part of the looking out is, you have, and we've told them with some of those designs, when you go back early enough, we have to have a log cabin. Cordell Hull came out of a log cabin. Alvin York came out of a log cabin. So Span Am, World War I, even up to World War II, that is a lot of Tennesseans' experiences. No running water, no electricity on a farm. So we have to show that it's not just the city aspect of it. People are living in apartments or this or that. But that's where we can show, that they are having this unique experience before they get put into the monolithic Army machine, which I don't mean that in any kind of bad way.
But I know what you're saying.
But you sort of lose that. And it's so interesting, as I sat here and we saw some of those artifacts connect to those stories, all of these guys are put into this machine where you're supposed to be made carbon copies of each other so that you follow orders and do what you're told. But you can see on all of those uniform pieces, they're all striving for something individual that sets them apart. What can I do with this? How can I wear my hat? What can I put on my helmet that sort of sets me apart? So those are the stories we're really gravitating for and telling. And we do want the stories of the sacrifice, those who never made it home. But like Tara mentioned, the effect that had on their support system at home, their family, their friends, how people's lives changed. So in previous museums, it wasn't such a holistic approach, but we're trying to look at that. The support for those veterans, especially when they come home, and the stories of how they, and some of you I'm sure are those, how did your life transition after service and what did you do? And those ideals that you picked up in service that carried you on, hopefully to a successful career and a good life, you know. So we're looking at, in terms of scholarship related to these specific conflicts, we are looking at the most modern scholarship, the most modern books that are coming out about that. And one other thing, and then I'll shut up, but we did originally, we had originally sort of had this concept of looking at Tennessean service in the military holistically throughout all these conflicts, but some of the early feedback we got from the museum team as well as some of the legislature was that we still needed to highlight and focus on these individual conflicts. So not that we were going to forget World War II or forget Vietnam, you just might necessarily had a section about Vietnam, but there may be something more about the experiences there. But we are going to have these sections. And the last thing I'll say, it's very important to us to build our collections around modern wars, but we still view Vietnam as being a very modern war. And this is, in a sad way, it's almost the last opportunity of that generation. The sort of look at that has changed a little bit in military history, and it's not as sort of vitriolic as it was when I was growing up. There was still a lot of open wounds with that. But, and as Tara and Larry and I have talked, whether you agree with why they went, tons of them had no choice. It was a draft and you had to go fight. So we need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge the service that they stepped out, fight for their country. But that's a modern conflict, and we really want to highlight that and give something that Vietnam veterans can be proud of their service to the United States, because like we saw with the World War II Museum in New Orleans, that generation is slipping away quickly. And so we want to see them have something where they can say the nation did appreciate what we did. Our state appreciated what we did. So there's a lot of aspects wrapped up in this. But yes, sir, we definitely want many, many artifacts. And these images you all saw were sort of the design of layout, color, elemental stuff. But there will be artifact cases in there with actual artifacts. Yeah. The stories tied to them and things.
Use music. Doctor will tell you, as far as educating people and touching people's hearts, the period music of the period at hand.
I would love that, rather than ambient sound.
Yeah.
The design firms always want like the ambient sound.
Let the
like,
World War II music be the, you know, let the over there music be over there. I mean, it's important, and it helps people open up.
Yes.
Music isn't, I mean, he's the one that taught me this, but music is an important tool in education.
Yeah. And it's also specific to Tennessee. I feel like music's so important
here.
Yeah.
You're not going to find some guy from North Dakota picking on a banjo, but you'll find a Tennessean.
Sometimes we're bad about not examining and focusing enough on pop culture.
I agree.
And that's a loaded term these days. It means so many things, but it is such a reflection of people's lives. You know, and
well, what we listen to, what we react to, all of those things are important in that kind of experience.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you say that. There's been talk of balancing that between, there will be some sort of soundtrack, and I don't, in our main museum, we have some ambient things. So like in the Civil War Gallery, you hear railroads and you hear entrenching tools. We don't have a lot of battle stuff because we did not want to trigger any PTSD or anything like that. So it's interesting hearing that, because we're having that debate about having this sounds of the military or more like patriotic songs.
You know, what the guys were listening to in the chopper in Vietnam, or, you know, Jumpin' Jack Flash.
That's kind of where I'd gravitate more towards too.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me. I want to make two very brief comments. First of all, I want to echo Warren's his laudatory comments about the Imperial War Museum. If you ever open that part of the country, that trench thing is, it's one of the most awesome things I've ever been in. Secondly, I want to echo this gentleman over here that mentioned earlier. I would like to comment a little on what he said here, because I tend to agree in something. First of all, I've been on the board of directors here for several years, In my other life, I've been an active reenactor in French and Indian War with Fort Loudon down here for over 30 years. I look at things a little bit differently. And the trend I've been seeing, and I've talked some to Warren about this over the last 20 years, more and more museums are going to what they call text blocks. People do not go to museums to read text blocks. Trust me on that.
Right. You're preaching to the choir right here, sir.
They go to see things. They go to see things.
Yes.
And I've sat around camps at historic sites all over. I was at Fort Loudon, Pennsylvania, just a couple of weeks ago. And reenactors they go to museums everywhere. They're complaining more and more. They're taking away the stuff and putting writing on the walls.
Yes.
People don't, and I'm probably the only person in the world that would do it. I'll go sit in a room in a museum for an hour.
Right.
And I will notice nobody reads what's on the wall.
Right.
They will look at the stuff.
Yes.
They'll pass right over. I don't care how accurate the text blocks are. They'll pass right over it and they look at stuff. I know there's a type, it's like walking or you got to have some beach. I'm not saying that. But I would be just
you're preaching to the choir. We want
I
our
was
stuff
gonna
in
say,
there
as
too.
the chief curator at the museum, that is, it's money. It's just money. And we push back against it all the time, but the new design firms that come in and the new way they're doing museums, they really sort of want to overwhelm you with these large, colorful graphics.
I know it.
So that you don't realize there's not a lot of artifacts on display. So we're constantly pushing back, trying to get more artifacts on display, I'm not, it's just the way it is, but every one of them you have to have a custom made mount for, which you have to bring somebody in, they measure, do all, so it's just, you start seeing the dollar signs tick up big time on that stuff. So we try as much as we can, and we do push back against people like Gallagher. We're like, no, we don't want this. We want to see the M1 carbine, the 1911.
The famous wall of guns, that a lot of museums have, where you can see all the different variations and everything.
But you also have to be conscious of your collection here as well.
Yes.
You
Right.
also don't want to jeopardize the safety of the artifacts that you have on display for the sake of just them being.
And we barely touched on that, but we planned every section. We wanted casework, but we also planned to put an artifact, like, for example, coats, that we could easily rotate. So, like, we have 2 bomber jackets now, so we can rotate without really messing up the story. Like, the person would be different, but you'd still be able to put another jacket in, another gun if we had multiple guns, another cap if we had multiple
But it's definitely a something that we're working with the design company too. In a lot of these pictures, you didn't see full size casework and stuff like that. And that's something we've worked with them since this was put together and everything, since this design phase. Because we're only at 50%. We have our 75% coming up, then we'll have the 100%. But it's something that we did communicate to them, is that we want these larger caseworks so we can put a full kit, something that's
like full mannequin.
Full mannequin, so I can be like, here's all the kit that an average soldier wore in Vietnam. Something that veterans can come in and be like, hey, I remember carrying that. That was heavy. I remember carrying that. That made me chafe. Things like that they can tie to and stuff like that. But we need those bigger cases to do that, and that's something that we're communicating with the design company, that hey, this is what veterans want. And I think with our ability to start meeting with more veteran organizations and getting their input on things too, we can present that back to the design company, and the design company can be like, oh wait, they do want these things.
Yeah, they don't really care what the 2 nerdy curators want.
If it was up to us, it'd just be like casework.
Hopefully we can get more and more people to say, well, it's not just us, the veterans want it too. Do it for the veterans.
And that's our main goal with the veterans, what the veterans want and stuff like that. So we're trying to really push for their input too in it, so we can.
But we had to get to this 50% before we could start sharing, so we had a basic footprint. But we do have all kinds of meetings set up with veteran organizations, so we're going to start getting people's feedback on this. Then, like Larry said, we can take that and leverage it with Gallagher. This is what the veterans want to see, so y'all need to redesign this, and we need to do something different.
Yes.
So it's all
an interesting dance.
You hit that 100% thing, and then
to do it right,
pencils down everybody.
Especially in a small footprint of a place. And they are also doing the Capitol Visitor Center. They're basically doing 2, and we are kind of the lesser of the 2. So we have to keep all that in mind, in addition to like who our audience coming through the galleries will be. So it's an interesting challenge, but we hope to keep you posted on it if you're interested, and we hope you come see it.
We're looking at 2027, I think, is the projected timeline for it to be open, because they're doing the entire building, so it might be a little bit. But
they want it for the next governor's inauguration.